Welcome to another story made by Oracle One. In the distant future, humanity had turned its gaze from prisons on Earth to the cold emptiness of space. Crime, once punished with confinement in cells buried beneath the Earth's surface, was now sentenced to orbital incarceration on satellites that harnessed the immense power of the Sun. These solar jails, as they were called, orbited the planet in synchronized positions to optimize energy collection, leaving inmates suspended high above humanity's everyday struggles, both literally and figuratively. These satellites were marvels of engineering, each a sprawling labyrinth of steel and glass-like materials capable of withstanding the punishing radiation and temperature extremes of near-Earth space. Inside, the inmates only knew one constant: the blinding light from solar panels and sun lamps that simulated a permanent daytime, designed to keep their bodies aligned with metric time and keep behavioral patterns predictable. Locked away in these prisons, the criminals were deprived not only of freedom but also of night itself. The solar-powered systems were their life source, providing energy for the gravity generators, life support, and electronic locks, all dependent on uninterrupted solar energy. Marsden-7 was one such solar jail, positioned at an altitude of 500 kilometers. It orbited in low Earth orbit around the equator, configured for optimized sunlight exposure, and comprised skeletal rings of living quarters around a central power core that pulsed with sunlight surge energy. Among the inmates was Jax Harrow, a man whose reputation sprawled beyond any one crime. Convicted as a political dissident in a draconian regime, Jax was branded a dangerous enemy with a history of hacking, sabotage, and rebellion against governing authorities. To him, Marsden-7 was both tomb and crucible, a social dead zone where the only thing worse than the cold silence of space was the constant, unyielding glare of artificial day. Jax had been biding his time for months, studying the patterns of the orbital correction engines, the daily routine of guards on the station, and most importantly, the solar energy fluctuations. The prison was powered solely by the sun's unrelenting radiance, and the station's systems consistently throttled power outputs with nothing to spare. But every orbital path, every alignment of cosmic bodies, held a secret weakness. That weakness was the Great Eclipse. Once every 2 years, the sun-facing satellite was shadowed in a brief but total solar eclipse, a cosmic event that plunged Marsden-7 into an unexpected and profound darkness. For precisely 8 minutes and 30 seconds, energy inputs dropped precipitously as the station's solar panels were cut off from their source. This event was a hazard to be endured, not an opportunity. Backup reserves sustained the life support and gravity systems during the blackout, but emergency protocols kicked in for total lockdown. Doors sealed airtight. Communications were routed through fail-safe satellites. Electronic systems entered fail-safe, hibernation mode, to conserve energy, and guards were doubled to enforce discipline during this vulnerable interval. But for Jax Harrow, the Great Eclipse was the singular moment of potential freedom. In the months leading up to the event, Jax had secretly manufactured a small but powerful electromagnetic pulse disruptor, cobbled together from scavenged parts and electronic scraps scavenged from workshops and neglected maintenance guides. His aim was to incapacitate the central power core's grid during eclipse mode, creating a cascading power failure that would open digital locks, scramble surveillance feeds, and plunge the station into blackout, not just from solar deprivation but from deliberate sabotage. He had recruited a handful of trusted allies, not friends, not associates, but fellow prisoners as desperate as he was. They called themselves the Eclipse Syndicate, shrouded figures who met in the shadows behind air ducts and beneath cold mechanical decks. Each of them understood that if they failed, they would be condemned to the void of airlock ejection, a routine punishment for attempted escapes. The day finally arrived, and the station's usual overcast of relentless light began dimming over that horizonless sky. At station command, a hushed tension filled the air, barely noticed over the soft hum of running machinery. Jax positioned himself near a critical junction where the power lines from the solar arrays merged into the central system. At the precise moment the eclipse's shadow engulfed them, Jax triggered the disruptor. A short surge of electromagnetic interference swept the mainframe, scrambling circuits and severing the lock controls in a cascade that confused the automated security grid. Locked doors blinked from red to green, and cameras turned to static. A deathly silence replaced the incessant mechanical whirring. Jax yanked open the bulkhead under the glow of emergency lamps swinging on backup batteries. He moved with the grain of the station, avoiding the automated patrol drones that malfunctioned in the blackout. Around him, fellow syndicate members unlocked auxiliary hatches using bypass codes Jax had extracted during months of clandestine data theft. But escaping a solar jail was never going to be simple. The satellites circled Earth at an orbital velocity of 8 km per second. Outside, a vacuum void awaited. Their only chance was the long-abandoned emergency shuttle docked beneath the power core, a small craft designed for rescue builds, now left to rust in an inaccessible hold. The syndicate raced to reach it before emergency power restored, a race against an unforgiving clock. Inside the shuttle bay, the air was thin, cold, and stale. Panels blinked erratically, warning of systems offline. Jax fumbled through the controls, guiding his allies to initiate a startup sequence stored in archaic programming files, saved during clandestine hacks. The engines hissed to life with groans, the main hatch sealing behind them. The dock disengaged, and the small vessel fretted with shudders as it moved away from the station's skeleton into the pitch-black beyond. "Where are we heading?" a voice whispered from the adjacent cabin. Jax's eyes scanned the starry horizon. Their options were bleak. The nearest friendly outpost orbited beyond the Van Allen belts, far beyond the reach of the station's security protocols, but it was a 10-hour journey for a craft designed only for emergency proximity maneuvers. Navigation controls were rudimentary and outdated. "We're running blind," Jax admitted. "We can't risk detection by ground patrols or orbital interceptors. The safest path is the polar corridor. It's rarely monitored and skirts outside the station's tracking laser network." The shadow of the eclipse was shrinking stealthily behind them as Marsden 7's automatic systems rebooted. Power surged back with white-hot intensity. The station's alarms screamed to life, and spotlights blazed along corridors. Patrol drones rebooted and scanned for intruders. On board the dock, panic began to swell. But Jax held firm, gripping the manual thrusters and plotting the star charts from memory. Each maneuver was precise, every angle calculated to avoid detection. As they sped through the darkness, Earth loomed beneath, the curve of its blue-green oceans and swirling clouds stretching far into the atmosphere. Jax peered through the shuttle's small viewport, imagining a life beyond imprisonment and eternal daylight. A life in which he could feel the cold night breeze or taste rain on his skin. But freedom carried its own perils. Survivors were scarce beyond the tightly controlled orbital zones. Political factions outpost in low orbit enforced surveillance, bounty hunters lurked on lunar colonies, and rogue AI watchers roamed like digital phantoms. The syndicate members huddled in the cramped shuttle, faces pale and glistening with sweat despite the cold. One by one, they accounted low rations of air, calorie packets, and spare oxygen. Every breath was precious, every hour lived was forged from desperation. Just as the vessel neared the polar corridor, Jax's sensors flickered with alert signals. They had triggered a ground-based radar sweep. "We've been spotted," Jax announced grimly, his hand crumpling on the joystick. Instantly, digital sirens burst from the speakers of their small craft. Outside, a swarm of sleek black interceptor drones blinked into existence, cutting through the void with a menacing precision that made the syndicate freeze. "Evasion protocols," Jax shouted. "Spin the vessel, break visual locks. We're heading into the geomagnetic storm belt, they won't track us there." With desperate flips and controlled burns, the shuttle darted into the innermost radiation belts, a region filled with charged particles and violent electromagnetic storms. The plasma flares shimmered past the craft's outdated shields, buffeting their hull. Inside, the navigation systems whirred and sparked as circuits overloaded. One drone surged close, its scanning beams searing the hull. The shuttle's aging defense systems retaliated with a burst of low-frequency EMP, short-circuiting the closest drone's sensors and sending it careening off course into the abyss. The physical and psychological warfare reached a peak. Each syndicate member gripped handholds for dear life as the shuttle shook under assaults. The horizon glittered with flashing auroras, their shimmering curtains behind windows blowing static across fragile electronics. Minutes turned into agonizing eternity. Then, abruptly, the storm's fury began to wane. The shuttle emerged beyond the belts, leaving behind the worst of the electromagnetic chaos. Jax exhaled wearily and checked their trajectory. They had slipped through the monitoring nets but were still deep into hostile sectors. Ahead lay the dark stretch of space between Earth and the Moon, isolated, deadly, but possibly their only chance. There, on the far side of the Moon, lay Haven Station. Officially a neutral research base, it was rumored to offer safe harbor to fugitives, dissidents, and those who could barter their freedom with information or services. "A last gamble," Jax whispered. Their approach was cautious. Long-range scans detected minimal activity. The station was old, with shielding meant more for scientific experiments than defense. Jax keyed the comm link, sending a coded distress call in hopes a sympathetic voice would answer. The response was immediate and crisp. "Haven Station Control. Identify yourself." "Escapee from Marsden 7, Jax replied carefully. "Seeking asylum." Silence followed. Hours of tense waiting as the station scrutinized their credentials via encrypted backchannels. Then permission was granted to dock, but with a catch: complete submission to quarantine and inspection. The syndicate, though battered and beaten, welcomed the reprieve. Docking hatches hissed open as airlock systems hummed. Stepping onto Haven's cold corridors, Jax was struck by the strange juxtaposition of the place. A sanctuary in exile, filled with refugees of myriad political, corporate, and criminal affiliations. Within Haven, alliances were fragile. Yet, here, at least, the shackles forged in the triple sun of Marsden 7's relentless orbit could loosen. Jax soon discovered the price of asylum. The station's leaders demanded a share of secrets from Marsden 7's sabotage, knowledge of systemic weaknesses, of guard rotations, of future eclipse time vulnerabilities. What he gave earned their protection, but also painted a target on their backs. Days passed, and news came through encrypted channels that Marsden 7 was in turmoil. The prison authorities were doubling down on security measures, adapting their energy reserves to cope with eclipse events, filling orbit with new autonomous drones, and transferring high-risk prisoners to other facilities. Jax knew that despite their daring escape, the solar jails were evolving, adapting, becoming even more efficient cages circling the Earth. The dream of freedom was shadowed by newer threats born from technology and tyranny. But as he watched Earth's blue orb from the station's observation window, Jax felt something primordial awaken, a fierce refusal to be just a number, a function, or a prisoner relegated to even the coldest frontier. His plan now shifted from survival to rebellion. The eclipse had shown him the cracks in the system. Power depended on light, and with enough planning, the darkness would be a sword to cleave their chains. Marsden 7 was just one outpost of a sprawling network of solar jails. Somewhere out there, others suffered beneath the endless white blaze of light. Somewhere, hope flickered behind locked doors. Jack's Harrow vowed then, beneath the quiet starlight, to ignite that hope. He would not merely escape the prison of light. He would bring darkness to their oppressors and light a way into freedom for all. For more stories, like and subscribe.